The old, isolated mansion on the fringe of the New Orleans woods was battered by the relentless rain, with each heavy drop pounding against the roof. The wind whistled through the gaps in the doorframe, evoking a haunting, eerie whisper of the night. The dim yellow light of the overhead lamp cast soft shadows across Claire Morgan's tired face as she sat calmly in the small kitchen. The house was so silent that she could hear the continuous ticking of the wall clock, and each second felt like a countdown to something unknown. Her eyes were affixed to the laptop screen in front of her as she reclined in her chair. The unfinished manuscript, which was replete with crossed-out sentences and fragmented thoughts, stared back at her. Her mind was vacant, yet her chest was oppressive, as if her emotions were striving to escape an invisible enclosure. There was a faint water ring on the wooden surface as the coffee on the table had become chilly. She looked out the window, where the streetlights were obscured by the rain, transforming the world beyond into a gray, washed-out painting. The stillness was abruptly interrupted by a faint noise emanating from the rear door. Claire's irises widened in alarm as she froze, her body stiffening. She attempted to convince herself that the stirring of the branches outside was merely the result of the wind. She held her breath. However, the same sound re-emerged, this time with a greater volume. The subtle yet deliberate crunch of footsteps on damp ground was the defining sound. Her pulse was so intense that she could feel it reverberating in her chest as she rose rapidly from her chair, her heart racing. She proceeded cautiously toward the back door after retrieving the small paring knife from the counter. Her shadow was cast on the wall by the kitchen light, and her diminutive form appeared to be engulfed by the darkness. Her hand trembled as she turned the latch, and the door swung open with a sudden gust of wind, conveying the sharp scent of wet earth and rain. A male was present in front of her. He was wet from head to toe, his leather jacket clinging to his frame, and rainwater was dripping from his hair onto his sharp, angular visage. His eyes, which were both profound and enigmatic, fixed on hers with an intensity that caused her to gasp. His voice was low and steady, but there was a hint of tension in his tone as he stated, "I did not intend to scare you." Claire's gaze was fixed on him, and she instinctively stepped back, tightening her hold on the knife. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice scarcely above a whisper, her voice hoarse. The individual did not respond immediately. He slowly raised one hand, his gesture deliberate, as if to demonstrate that he had no intention of causing injury. He stated, "I am lost," with each syllable being deliberate and measured. "I was unable to locate my way back to town due to the excessive rainfall. Is it possible for me to remain here for a brief period until the tempest subsides?" Claire was unable to move as she was divided between two opposing impulses. A portion of her yearned to close the door and contact the authorities, while the other part was unable to turn her gaze from him. There was something about him that was both magnetic and perilous, and it kept her firmly planted. She forced herself to remain composed by inhaling deeply. She said quietly, "Come in," and the words escaped her lips before she could second-guess them. However, this will only be for a brief period. The stranger entered, bringing with him the weight of the unknown and the chill of the rain-soaked night. The tempest and the world beyond were sealed off as the door closed behind him with a gentle thud. It was now just the two of them, standing in the small kitchen, the air between them dense with tension and unspoken secrets. Claire could sense the change in the atmosphere, the way each inhalation felt heavier than the last. She was aware at that precise moment. This evening would be anything but ordinary. In the kitchen, which was dimly illuminated, Claire sat across from the stranger. The air between them was dense with tension, as if the entire room was holding its breath, anticipating a word or gesture that would break the suffocating silence. Elliot Kane. After hanging his leather jacket, which was soaked with rain, on the back of a chair near the entrance, he proposed that name. He remained seated, but his gaze never strayed from Claire, as if he were meticulously observing each movement and breath she took. Claire felt the weight of his gaze, but instead of discomfort, she felt a magnetic and perilous pull that she had never before experienced. "How long have you resided in this location?" Elliot inquired, his voice both deep and gentle, and his demeanor conveying a sense of curiosity rather than intrusion. Claire's eyes were fixed on her tightly clasped hands, which were reclining on the table as she sipped from her cold coffee. "Enough time to recognize that this location is tranquil," she replied, her voice distant, her gaze drifting toward the window where the rain continued to lash against the glass. "It's so quiet that sometimes it makes me forget I'm really alive," she said. She was unable to prevent the words from escaping her lips, and the vulnerability in them astonished her. What was the reason for her statement? It was as though she had just disclosed an aspect of herself that she had expended considerable effort to conceal. Elliot did not respond immediately. His expression was inscrutable, hovering between appraisal and comprehension as he reclined in his chair. "This location appears to have a greater number of stories than it discloses," he stated uniformly, although his words were tinged with a subtle undercurrent. Claire's curiosity was aroused as she pondered. "What do you mean by that?" she inquired, feeling as though she had been enticed into a game whose regulations she was unfamiliar with. Elliot shrugged, but his sharp, piercing eyes suggested otherwise, as if he were testing her reaction. "Simply a sensation," they said. "Is it not the case that homes of this nature always have a history? These walls have likely witnessed events that the current residents would prefer not to be aware of." Claire's voice remained unwavering, despite the shiver that went down her spine. She concealed the sensation with a faint smile. "She observed that you possess an extraordinary imagination. It is possible that you would have been more successful as a writer rather than wandering in the rain." Elliot's laughter was brief, but it was not particularly affectionate. There was an element in it that sounded self-deprecating. "Potentially. However, I do not believe I possess the fortitude to remain seated and composed," he stated, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel as though he was observing her without her consent. "I favor the pursuit of the truth." His words caused Claire's heart to beat faster. Although they appeared to be harmless, she experienced a sensation as though he had just removed a layer of her defenses. "Why?" She resolved to alter the subject, despite the minor tremor in her hands as they rested on the table. "Elliot, who are you truly?" she inquired, her voice low but tinged with an unmistakable inquiry. "Additionally, what is your genuine purpose for being present? Please do not inform me that it is solely due to the rain." Elliot was silent for a brief period, his attention diverting to the coffee cup that was situated in front of him. He slowly rotated it between his fingertips as if contemplating his response. He said slowly, his voice almost a murmur, "I have heard of this place before. A residence with a hidden history." I was inquisitive. "Additionally, I may be in quest of something that I am uncertain I will be able to locate." Claire's chest tightened as she inclined her head. "What do you mean? A secret?" she inquired, attempting to conceal the growing sense of unease that was permeating her voice. Elliot raised his gaze to Claire, and for the first time, she observed a distinct quality, a mixture of melancholy and the enigmatic aura that had always enveloped him. "Claire, have you ever experienced it?" Elliot inquired, his tone indicative of an unexpected candor. The sensation of something being just out of reach, so near yet unattainable. "It appears as though every aspect of your life has been meticulously planned to ensure that you remain in pursuit of it indefinitely." Claire's body remained frozen. His words penetrated her like a blade, severing the emptiness she had long suppressed. Indeed, she had experienced it. In the extended, solitary days that followed the dissolution of her marriage, she spent countless evenings gazing at a blank screen, struggling to resolve inquiries that lacked answers. She was fully aware of the subject matter he was discussing. However, the gesture of acknowledging it aloud was too vulnerable and unsettling. She responded with a steady but restrained voice, "Perhaps. However, I have acquired the knowledge to refrain from conducting searches for items that I am uncertain about." Elliot offered a slight smile, but it was not one of mirth. His voice was scarcely audible, yet his eyes were filled with an unspoken turmoil as he said, "Then you are luckier than I am." Claire did not respond. She was uncertain as to what had prompted this individual to visit her residence. However, she was certain of one thing. Elliot Kane stirred emotions that she believed had long since perished in a single night. However, the precise nature of his desires, whether they emanated from the house or from her, remained a mystery that she was unable to ignore. The rain persisted in its rhythmic pounding against the windows, blending with the dense, charged air in the kitchen. Claire gradually approached the table where Elliot was seated, his gaze fixed on the diminutive wooden box that was situated between them. While cleaning out the storage room a few days ago, she discovered an ancient, weathered object. Claire had initially disregarded it. However, tonight, following the cryptic conversation with Elliot, she was consumed by a persistent nagging sensation. She was compelled to open it. "This container," she said hesitantly, attempting to interpret Elliot's expression. "It has been here since before I moved in. It was never on my mind to open it." Not until this moment. Elliot did not respond immediately. While his visage remained unreadable, the flicker of interest that crossed it was unmistakable, and his dark eyes became sharper. Claire sat across from him, her movements deliberate, and her fingers lingering on the lid before she raised it. A yellowed handwritten missive and an antiquated photograph were contained within. She initially reached for the letter, which was dim but still legible due to its elegant script. The confession was a love letter from a man to a woman named Madeline, written with a sense of urgency that conveyed both devotion and desperation. Claire placed the letter on the ground, her fingertips lightly brushing the photograph that lay beneath it. She meticulously grasped it and gazed at it. The image depicted a couple standing side by side, their eyes brimming with an almost tangible sense of affection. However, there was something about the image that left her breathless, as if it bore a weight that she was unable to fully comprehend. She murmured the name Madeline as she read it aloud. "Are you familiar with her?" Elliot leaned forward and removed the photograph from her hands. The image appeared to cause his eyes to lose focus, as if it had drawn him into a remote memory that he was not yet prepared to revisit. He uttered that name slowly, his voice becoming almost ponderous and lower than it had been previously. "It is well known." He paused, his hands clasping the photograph's borders. "I have previously encountered it in an antiquated context." He hesitated, as if contemplating whether or not to elaborate. Eventually, he gazed into her eyes. "Claire, are you aware that this residence was previously the location of a disappearance?" His words struck her like electricity. Claire's pulse beat so violently that it resonated in her ears as she gazed at him. "Are you referring to Madeline?" she inquired, her voice wavering more than she had anticipated. Elliot nodded and meticulously repositioned the photograph on the table. "Years have passed since she vanished. The case was never resolved. This residence. This was the final location where she was observed by anyone." Claire was unable to turn her gaze from Elliot, despite the fact that a shiver ran down her spine. The manner in which he spoke and the way in which his gaze remained fixed on the photograph indicated that this was not merely a fleeting interest for him. He was not merely retelling a narrative. He was inextricably linked to it, bonded by a force that was both more profound and more personal than she could yet comprehend. Claire murmured, more to herself than to him, "Everything I thought I knew about this house is wrong." Elliot gazed upward at her, and for a brief moment, his eyes contained a raw emotion that she was unable to identify. It was a combination of concern and something much darker. Their initial encounter was not particularly delightful. It was not the serene romantic moment that Claire might have imagined in a previous existence. It was raw and intense, as if both of them were frantic to demolish every barrier that had ever existed between them. In that instant, Claire relinquished to the warmth and fragrance of him. She was uncertain as to whether it was morally correct or not. This was the first time in a long time that she felt genuinely alive, and that was all she knew. When they finally separated, their faces were centimeters apart and they were both breathing heavily. Neither individual averted their gaze. Elliot whispered to Claire, his voice raspy with emotion, I am uncertain about the outcome of this. However, I am aware that I am unable to halt. Claire's surroundings receded into the background as she met his gaze. The kitchen, the rain, and the secrets all dissipated, leaving only him. She was unwilling to inquire for the first time. She was unwilling to contemplate. Her sole objective was to adhere to the current that had engulfed her, regardless of its destination, even if it resulted in a place from which she could never return. Claire's kitchen, which was once a sanctuary of security and comfort, now appeared oppressive and suffocating. The overhead light's soft yellow radiance was devoid of its customary warmth. Instead, it cast long, looming shadows on the walls, resembling spirits from a forgotten past. Elliot's visage was tense with tension as he stood across from her. The photograph and the letter from the small wooden box were still present on the table between them, but they no longer appeared to be mundane objects. They were keys to a concealed story, a truth that neither Claire nor Elliot was prepared to confront. "Is there something you are withholding from me?" Claire's voice was more incisive than she had anticipated, and she broke the silence. She fixed her gaze on Elliot, examining each trace of emotion that appeared on his face. "Elliot, what is your genuine purpose in being present? Please refrain from informing me that you simply happened upon this residence by coincidence, as I will be skeptical." Elliot's hand was clenched securely against the table's edge, and his knuckles were turning a bright shade of white. He was frozen in place. Claire observed a battle raging in his eyes, a pain that he was frantically attempting to conceal. "Claire," he began, his voice subdued and deliberate, as if he were selecting his words with great care. "There are certain items that are difficult to articulate. However, you must have faith in me. I had no intention of causing you harm." "Did you cause me harm?" Claire's lips curled into a wry smile as she let out a bitter chuckle. "Therefore you acknowledge that there is a subject about which I am unaware. Are you acquainted with Madeline? Additionally, you arrived at this location in search of an item that is associated with her. Is that accurate?" Elliot's shoulders slumped as if the weight of the universe had been placed on them. As he confessed, he lowered his head, his voice scarcely audible. "Indeed, I am aware of Madeline. I am aware that she resided in this location. Additionally, I am aware that she has vanished." Claire experienced the sensation of being sucked into a vortex, as the air around her spun at an increasing pace. She did not speak, despite the fact that her heart was beating against her ribcage. She required him to continue, in order to disclose the information that he had concealed. Elliot lifted his head to meet her gaze, inhaling deeply. As he continued to speak, his eyes, which were filled with anguish, fixed on hers. "Claire, Madeline was not merely a name in an old case. I harbored affection for her." Claire was struck by his words with the force of a thunderclap. She remained motionless, her eyes wide as she gazed at him. "You? Did you have feelings for her?" she whispered, her voice barely escaping her lips. Each word was as pointed as a blade, cutting through the tension in the room. Elliot acknowledged. "I did. She was indispensable to me. And then she disappeared without a trace. I have been in pursuit of her for years, and I have finally found her in this residence. I believed that I could discover some answers by visiting this location." The ground beneath Claire's feet shifted, and she felt every ounce of conviction crumble. She desired to express her frustration, accusing him of exploiting her and intruding into her life with an ulterior motive that he had intentionally concealed. However, she was unable to do so when she gazed into his eyes, which were pierced with anguish. "Therefore, the primary focus is on Madeline?" she inquired, her voice trembling with a combination of wrath and disappointment that she was unable to fully express. Elliot initially acknowledged that it was true. However, he rapidly approached her, his eyes ablaze with passion. "However, Claire, everything has undergone a significant transformation. You have transformed me. It is unclear as to when it transpired, however I am aware of this fact. Now I am not present solely due to Madeline. I am present as a result of your presence." Claire's mind was in a state of disarray as she stood motionless. She desired to trust him, to believe that his affection for her was genuine. However, her skepticism persisted. "Are you expressing your affection for me?" she inquired with a calm yet incisive tone. "However, how can I trust you, Elliot, when all I have to go on are the fragments of the truth you have chosen to disclose to me?" The tension between them was so intense that it appeared as though it could break under its own weight. A loud knock reverberated from the front door before Elliot could respond, causing them both to startle. Claire's heart was pounding as she turned toward the noise. She was not anticipating any visitors, and it was inappropriate for anyone to be present at this time. Victor Harlow, her elderly neighbor, entered the house as the door cracked open. Before settling on Claire, his acute eyes glanced over Elliot. He apologized for his intrusion, his voice pensive and deep. "However, I believe it is time for you to acquire the truth about the man standing in front of you and about this home." Her chest tightened as a suffocating sensation of dread settled over her, and Claire's gaze darted between Victor and Elliot. It was as if the walls of her world were collapsing in on themselves, and everything around her was unraveling. She was uncertain about whom to trust and what to believe. However, one thing was certain. Everything would undergo a transformation tonight, and there would be no turning back. As if the suffocating tension had absorbed every sound, the air in the room felt weighty. Claire's gaze alternated between Elliot and Victor as she stood motionless in the kitchen. She could not yet comprehend the secrets that both men held, the fragments of truth that they carried. The kitchen, which was once her sanctuary and refuge, now resembled a battlefield. She was at the center of it all, and the weapons were words and gestures. Victor demanded that she pay attention to him, his demeanor surpassing anything she had previously encountered. He advanced into the kitchen, his presence abruptly becoming more substantial and weighty, as if he were burdened by the weight of years. His sonorous voice resonated, each word deliberate and resonant with significance. "This individual is not who you believe him to be. Claire, he is not present due to his affection. He is present due to an obsession. And if you permit him, he will drag you down with him." Elliot interrupted, his voice frigid and sharp. "That is sufficient, Victor." The air between them was electric, as if they were engaged in an unspoken duel, as his eyes fixed onto Victor with a deadly intensity. "She is not required to listen to any of your accusations. You are ignorant." "Know nothing?" Victor's chuckle was dry and hollow, emanating a darkness that caused Claire to shiver. "Elliot, I possess a greater depth of knowledge than you may realize. I am aware that you have been monitoring this residence for an extended period of time. I am aware that you have been consumed by Madeline. However, inform her of this. Did you inform her that you were the last person to see Madeline alive?" Claire was struck by the words with the force of a physical strike. The room spun around her, and she stood motionless, her consciousness blank. She turned to Elliot, examining his face for a denial, an explanation, or any other evidence that would contradict Victor's assertions. However, Elliot's irises became dimmer, and his silence conveyed a great deal. She did not require him to verify it. She was already aware. "Elliot," she whispered, her voice scarcely audible, her body trembling with disbelief. "What is he expressing? Is it accurate?" Elliot turned to face her, and she observed something she had never seen before in his eyes. A desperation, a vulnerability, and an anguish that he was unable to conceal. He began, his voice breaking. "Claire, this is accurate. I was the final individual to observe Madeline. However, this is not the reason for her disappearance. I endeavored to rescue her. I exerted myself to the fullest extent, however, I was unsuccessful." She was devastated by the admission. It was as if the ground beneath her was giving way, and every truth she had clung to was disintegrating in an instant. She stated, "You were aware of everything," her voice quivering as her emotions surged to the surface. "You were aware of Madeline. You were aware of the significance of this residence. Nevertheless, you continued to visit this location. You implicated me in this matter. Elliot, what is the reason? What was the reason for your failure to inform me at the outset? Elliot responded with a low voice and a genuine emotion. I didn't want to lose you. Claire instinctively retreated as he approached. I did not wish for you to perceive me as merely a man who was fixated on the past. I did not wish for you to regard me in the manner in which you are currently viewing me. Victor advanced once more, his tone becoming increasingly icy. Is it not apparent to you, Claire? He was never forthright with you. He arrived here in search of Madeline and will not relent until he has the object of his desire, even if it means destroying you. Claire's heart tore in two as she gazed from Victor to Elliot. At least one aspect of her desired to have faith in Elliot, to believe that his actions were rooted in authentic emotion. However, the opposing faction was unable to disregard Victor's words. The truth was that Elliot had concealed an excessive amount of information from her. The reality was that she had only been a part of his search for answers from the very outset. Elliot's eyes were riveted on Claire's, and his voice was now pleading. You must have faith in me. I am unable to alter the past, but I am aware of the present, and I am currently available to assist you. I am unable to let you go. She gazed at him, his sincerity piercing the tumult of her emotions. However, the turmoil persisted in the recesses of her heart. She was uncertain about whom to trust. Elliot, the individual who had rescued her from her solitude but had maintained numerous secrets, who was he? Or Victor, the neighbor who appeared to be trustworthy but whose warnings were laced with his own enigmas? Claire ultimately stated, both of you must depart, her voice remaining composed and more resolute than she had anticipated. I am incapable of accomplishing this. I am unable to determine between the truth and the concealment of information. I require patience. I require both of you to depart from my existence. Elliot attempted to protest by opening his mouth, however, Claire intervened by raising her hand. Elliot, this is incorrect. I am unwilling to receive any additional information. Allow me to identify my own solutions. He hesitated, the anguish in his eyes unmistakable. However, he refrained from disputing the matter. Rather, he stepped toward the door and nodded slowly. One final time, he turned his gaze back to her before departing. Claire, I trust that you will achieve tranquility. And when you are prepared, I will be present. Victor did not provide any additional information. He followed Elliot to the door, but before departing, he placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. His eyes were clouded with apprehension, and his grasp was firm yet gentle. Claire, exercise caution. It is possible that the item you are seeking is not the one you are seeking. The silence in the kitchen was deafening as the door closed behind them. The familiar objects around Claire were cast in shadows by the faint, fluctuating light, but they no longer felt the same. Claire stood still. She experienced a sense of being at a fork in the road, with one path leading to truth and suffering and the other to serenity and emptiness. She was uncertain as to which path she would pursue. However, she was certain of one thing. She was unable to revert to the life she had known before, as the events of the previous evening had irrevocably altered her. Like what you heard. There's plenty more heartbreak and secrets to come. Hit like, subscribe, and stay curious with Tangled Truths.